My name is Charles Haynes, and I'll be sharing with you a few of my experiences with Avatar Meher Baba. I first heard of Meher Baba in 1957, when just 1 year before he came, and we weren't told very much about him at that time, so that when he came in 1958, in May of 1958, we didn't know who he was, and when we met him as children, we met him on our own as individuals. At that time, this was Baba's last visit to the United States, and he came to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And at that time, Baba was making no public appearances, but was simply coming for his lovers. And the reason that we got to see Baba was that we had heard of him through Elizabeth and Kitty, and they had asked specially for us, our family, to be allowed to come to him. Now, the first one in our family to meet Baba was my mother, and she, at that time, had not yet had a deep inner experience of Meher Baba, and was just beginning to draw towards him. And her 3 children, including myself, had to go to school. So going to school every day while Baba was there, we saw very little of him, except on a few special occasions. And that was Meher Baba's wish, that those who were in school remain in school. So we did get to meet Baba finally, one by one, my brother John first, and then I, and then my sister Wendy. And I'll try and recall that first meeting with Baba. I remember, being 8, of course, I met Baba from the point of view of a child, point of view of someone who had no mental blocks, in a sense, someone who was not schooled deeply in a particular way of looking at things, so that in a way, coming in Meher Baba's presence, as a child, gave me a particular advantage. I remember that day we were lined up outside of the lagoon cabin, which was a little place where Baba would greet individuals in groups. And Meher Baba knew that we were coming to meet him that day. My brother and I were together. And as we came in, or as we were lining up outside, I began to wonder just what he was like and who it was that I would be meeting. Now, as a child, I had always loved God. I'd enjoyed church, and I wanted someday to work for God. But I had never imagined anything like a master. Jesus was not very personal to me growing up. And of course we weren't told exactly who Meher Baba was, so none of these thoughts were entering my mind, although I feel that in my heart there were a lot of things there that were unspoken, that Meher Baba cleared up, and the first glimpse I ever had of him. Because as I was standing outside of that cabin, I tried to glimpse in to see him, to see who it was I was going in to meet. And I couldn't see. All the people ahead of me were taller, so I kept peeking around. And finally, I got a brief glimpse of Baba, just a split second. And in that split second, I saw the Christ. Not the image of the Christ that is usually pictured, but my own image, my own inner image of what he must have been like as Jesus. And I thought to myself very quickly, oh, it's Jesus. And then we were to go in, so I had no time to ponder that. And I think a child, of course, is accepting, is open, and experiences seemed to come naturally to children. So when we went in to be with Meher Baba, he had already wiped away or shown something of himself that was to make it much easier for me to come and to know him as the Christ. That first moment with Meher Baba is, of course, the most wonderful and the most unforgettable. He embraces immediately as one meets him, and he's especially good with children, and he's always cheerful. And it struck me later, much later, how remarkable it was that I didn't know, didn't think about Baba being silent, for one thing, or the way he dressed. Any of these things that might strike an individual as you meet Meher Baba. But he was so natural in himself that no matter how unusual he might be, thinking about him later, when you're with him, it's as though you've always known him. He's the most familiar thing in the universe that you've ever come in contact with. And he makes you feel immediately at home. With humor, with naturalness, with friendliness. And my brother and I stood next to Baba, and he looked up at us and he smiled. And I tell you, it was as though he spoke. But I know now he just gestured, and Baba said, would you like to come where I am? And I looked down at Baba and I smiled and I said, I thought immediately, of course, India. You see, so I said, oh, yes, Baba. Yes, and Baba looked at me and he said, oh, you will. You will. And as far as I can remember, that's the only thing that Meher Baba ever asked me. He told me a few things in the short times that I was with him. That's the only thing he ever asked me. But I suppose that when one thinks about it, it's the only thing worth having the avatar ask you anyway. That brief moment with Baba, we were allowed to be with him just a little while, and then during his stay in 1958, we saw him again a few times. As I say, the children, those children that were at the center at the time, had a special place they were supposed to be and play. The children who were in school in Myrtle Beach were supposed to remain in school, Baba being very practical. And ordinarily, children were not allowed to go to the barn, which was the large meeting place where Meher Baba met with everyone who was at the center. But I was in love with Baba from the moment I met him, and it's the only person I've ever met whose presence I did not want to leave. I just did not want to leave his presence. And when I had to, I longed to come and see him again. And when the times we were at the center and Baba would be in the lagoon cabin seeing people, or he'd be somewhere with people, I'd always hang around outside and wait to see if we could get a glimpse of him. And some of us would try to push through and catch hold of him when he'd pass along. And later I realized the importance of taking every moment with him. You know, but I think that as a child I had the advantage of not thinking about it, but simply knowing from my heart the importance of his love and responding in that way, so that I never wanted to be away from him. There were a few things I can remember that vividly that Baba gave at that time to us. One of the most beautiful, and I think probably the most memorable, was the day that Baba left the center to go nearby to my mother's theater, and he was going to see films taken of his 56th visit. Well, everyone was to go with him, and we all stood around his car as Baba got in, and he had to be helped in. Baba was not walking very well at the time. And I held the door for Baba, and then closed it and looked in, and I guess I must have looked forlorn because Baba looked out the window and smiled, and then he said, "All right, come on." And he opened the door, and Baba moved over into the middle of the seat, which was very difficult for Baba. He was in great pain, even though I didn't realize how much he was suffering. At the time, he was suffering immense pain. And he moved over in the middle and let me sit next to him. And my friend, Chip, who's also my age, we were both 8 years old. I don't know if I mentioned that. And he got in the back. So we rode with Baba the short distance. Now, in that short distance, Baba managed to get in a lot, as he usually does. Kitty was in the back seat. And Kitty, in her own way, is always keeping things lively. And so she asked Baba a question. He said, "Baba, what about Jane and Charles, my mother and father, who had just separated?" He said, "What about their marriage? Should they try to reconcile their differences and come back together?" And Baba turned in the car so that he was facing me where I sat, but so that Kitty could see his gestures. And he took his 2 fingers and he parted them like that, and said that they were to remain apart. And then she said, "But Baba, how will the children be able to grow up and be taken care of without a father in the home? How will Jane be able to raise the children on her own?" And then Baba turned all the way so that he was facing me directly next to him, and he smiled, that famous smile. And Baba said, "I am their father." Baba said. Erich said, "I am their father." So from that time on, Wendy and John and myself, and Baba referred to us as the trio, Baba's shorthand, felt as though in our relationship with Baba, he was indeed our father. Now a father has to perform many roles, and Baba performed them all beautifully for all of us, for all 3 of us. And just those few other times in '58, I can remember that Baba would always reach out whenever children would come near. Whenever we would be approaching Baba, around Baba, he would always make way through the crowd and touch us, reach out to us. And sometimes he'd go like this, do you know? He'd go like, and he would grab you like that. And that, you'd really feel Baba, and you can never forget that hand on your face once he'd reached out. And he was very strong. Although Baba was physically weak and suffering at the time, when he wanted to, he could just reach out. His hand would be like a vice and grip you and pull you to him. And he made you feel his presence in every way possible. So and all focus was always on Baba. Wherever he would go, it's like a light when he'd go through a crowd or he'd be sitting somewhere. All hearts, all minds completely focused on Baba. And he always would insist on alertness. Everyone should be alert, awake. We, of course, couldn't understand all the discourses, my sister being only 6, my brother 10, and I'm in the middle. And we couldn't understand all that was being said and talked about. So we had another advantage, you see. We didn't have to use the mind so much. Could let Baba speak to us. So we had our own relationship with Baba. And he didn't leave anybody out. I think even all the animals. You know that there was a turtle then too who came. And I think we were kind of in the position of that turtle, you know, who would come every day to the little cabin there, and he would sit there the day long, and Baba, of course, would be in there inside, and then he'd go back into the water or wherever he came from, right? And when Baba left the center, we never saw him again. But every day while Baba was there, that turtle would come up out of the water, sit right near the cabin where Baba was, and then go back. So we felt, I think the children had that experience of just knowing who he was. Didn't matter what anybody said or anybody did. Now, I've never really said that I know who Meher Baba is before, because I think that's a tremendous statement to make, to presume to know who he is. But as long as we're going on record, I think that it is fair to say that I do know who he is in every way that is possible for a human being to know. Because the heart, which is the seat of knowledge, of true knowledge, is what Baba touched first in me. And with all the certainty that your heart can give you, I know that Meher Baba is the Christ, the God-man of our time. Who else could he be? One day, during that trip, I longed to see Baba. And I've since discovered that Mother also longed for me to go and to see Baba. Something I didn't realize at the time. I didn't understand, you see, why I couldn't be with him all the time. But we were supposed to go to school, and that's obedience. If Baba says you do something, you do it. You don't question why or say, it should be another way. It just is done. But of course, we didn't understand that as children, that it was an order. We simply knew we had to go to school, which is the worst thing, especially when you want to do something so badly. And Baba was so close. So Mother got in the car in front of our house, and I walked the 2 blocks to the bus stop to catch the bus to go to school. Well, Baba worked it out, because as I got to the bus stop, just before the bus, I could see the bus coming down the road. Of course, I was weeping all the way, right? I was just crying, couldn't stop. Because I knew Mother was going to be with Baba, and I wanted to go to the center to be with Baba. And I just couldn't, you know. It was just the most heart-rending thing. And I saw the car, and it stayed there. And I got all the way to the bus stop, and the car was still sitting there in front of the house. I took my chances, and I ran back as fast as I could, got to the car, and just as soon as I got to the car door and my hand on the handle, the car had started. Mother had not been able to get it started. She hadn't been able to leave. And that even though she was new to Meher Baba, she knew that that must be what he wanted. So she opened the door and let me in. And that was the day, the only day that I was allowed to be with Baba in the barn. And I can't tell you what was said, or what discourses were read, but I can say that sitting near Baba, children also had the advantage of being able to get very close, sitting next to Baba, and just being allowed to concentrate on him and to watch him. I've never seen an individual with as much grace, with as much freedom, with as much humor and cheerfulness. And even if a child does not know what is going on in the room, he holds one's attention completely for hours, just by the sheer force of his being. Incredible individual. His every move seemed to have something to it. His every glance. And when he would glance at you, it would be just searing. It would go all the way through you, as though he knew everything about you. And even at that time, I can remember feeling that Baba knows me completely. In my own childlike way, you know, I felt that he really knows me, and he loves me. Ordinarily, I was a very shy child. But Baba brought out all of the things that had been kept down in everyone around him. He had the capacity to make you more of what you naturally are, in every sense of the word. So that I found myself being able to be free with him, to play with him. And he would tease me all the time. I guess because he knew that I needed to be loosened up. He knew that I needed to be freer with him. So he would tease me and play with me. There were little times with Baba, little moments with Baba that one, come back. And since then I thought, well, why did Meher Baba allow us to be with him? Why did he allow a few to touch him, to see how beautiful, how glorious he was, to walk where he walked, to feel his love? And I don't know the answer why, but I have a feeling that the answer now is found in the hearts of all of those who love him around the world.